All right, hey, welcome. This is Barry Snow. I am a technical account manager here with SecurityBridge, and I'm joined by Bill Oliver. He's our Director of Technical Services here at SecurityBridge. And we're here today to help unscramble the alphabet soup that the American government has set up with all of our lovely acronyms. So let's dive in today on this topic of mastering NIST and CISA compliance for SAP. I'll start off by giving you a little overview of the departments, and then we'll dive in on some of the interesting information. So just to tell you a little bit about myself and Bill, we're both coming from the SAP security focus of the SAP consulting practice for many years. You can look up our bios online and LinkedIn, and we're happy to be joining you. So what is NIST? It is the National Institute of Standards, and it is a bureau of the United States Department of Commerce. So it's an old body. It's established in 1901, actually. This body, think of it as a science-based body. There's been a lot of involvement in important inventions, even in American history, including some computer technology. So that is a little bit about NIST. And then the question is, well, what is CISA? CISA is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It is part of the Department of Homeland Security. And on the right, what you might see is a massive org chart, and that's sort of by design. After the 9/11 attack in 2001, 100 years after NIST was created, Congress passed the Homeland Security Act and triggered this massive reorg. So you see this organizational structure. It's mostly split up into what I would call a back office of directorates and offices. And then there is a front office. The front office would be more citizen-facing departments that you might be familiar with. So I'm going to go through a few of those. We'll just click through them pretty quickly. I'm just going to wait on this screen to finish building. There is the Secret Service, which came from the Treasury Department. And they said, okay, let's put that into Homeland Security. Immigrations and Customs was brought over. Probably best known as ICE. There's a couple more here to add. Customs and Border Protection. But wait, there's more. Citizens and Immigration, Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. Of course, everyone who flies through an American airport is familiar with the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration. And all of these are, oh wait, there's even more. Let's bring in the Coast Guard. All of these are mostly around physical borders and physical points of entry in the U.S. But we brought in Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency to help with some of these digital and electronic points of entry into the U.S. So it was actually a directorate in 2007 and was promoted to an agency in 2018. So now, if you look at all this alphabet soup that's comprised in the Homeland Security, you'll see CISA. It's part of that organization. The best way to think about CISA is it's around protecting us from attacks, but specifically cybersecurity and digital infrastructure. There is one other body. We're going to kind of throw this one in. There's the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is not under a secretary or what would we call it, a department under the president. But the president does appoint commissioners to this Securities and Exchange Commission. The Securities and Exchange Commission, you can think of it, they are the referees for the stock market, the financial markets. Their most common activity seems to be to sue people, but usually it's because they stepped out of line, and the way to bring them back into line is through a lawsuit. So if we circle back to NIST, why are we talking about NIST today? Because they have a cybersecurity framework. This framework was set up in 2013, so it's almost 10 years old. NIST was established into law in 1901, but then an executive order from the president brought the cybersecurity framework into place in 2013. Now, 10 years later, we're ready for a refresh. So early next year, look for the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. That'll be coming out in the beginning of next year. But let's hop over to CISA. Why are we talking about CISA today? Because they have released what are called cybersecurity performance goals. Just to give you some of the cliff notes here, the cybersecurity performance goals are in line with the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CSF. So you don't have to worry about them being out of alignment and matching up two sets of goals and frameworks. They are in alignment. And Bill's also going to cover another fourth body where these departments and agencies are working together, and they are trying to stay in alignment. That's good to know. So why are we talking about CSF and CPGs on a call with SAP folks? The main reason is because cybersecurity is more and more relevant to SAP environments. And I use the term or the hashtag SAP cybersecurity. If some of you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see SAP cybersecurity a lot as a hashtag that I use. And my question to you is, well, what about all these frameworks and goals? What if you could operate your SAP environment in line with these frameworks and goals automatically and continuously? You know, if you think about this wheel here with the 5 steps, it starts with identify, and then it goes to protect, detect, respond, recover. That's a framework from NIST. Well, that's great, but if you have to do all of that manually, it can be very labor intensive. So if you're looking for a way to save time but still be working within that framework, if you're looking for a way to increase your accuracy and have less risk of error from manual tasks, if you're looking for a way to have more complete results on, you know, what is your risk posture, what is the actual attack surface of your SAP environment, then in that case, I would recommend that you go for an automated solution. Yes, you can do a framework and cybersecurity performance goals manually. You can do that manually, sure, but definitely you want to look for an automated solution. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this over to Bill to take over from here. And Bill, over to you.
Well, thank you, Barry. I appreciate that. As Barry was saying earlier, you saw the evolution of the government agencies and departments started with the physical security and the physical standards, now into the electronic and the cyber security, if you would. And it was a natural evolution. But CISA and NIST, they don't just operate within themselves, they operate globally within the rest of the US government agencies. And one of them here, about a month ago, came out with a clear concept, NSA, National Security Agency. They're kind of the spies and the spooks, if you would. And they came up working with CISA on 3, the top 10 misconfigurations, and 3 of them, default configuration, poor patch management, and bypassing of system controls. I'm going to talk a little bit about today through the framework, through the NIST framework, which I think is something, again, as we're really excited about that. Barry, if you would. Thank you. So we'll start with identify. And the first thing your organization has to do and understand is really identify those cybersecurity risks. And the first thing I'm going to challenge all of you to do is to say, SAP, if you have it, it is part of your cybersecurity risks. If you have S4, all the other ones, business objects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because look, it's the #1 system used for ERP. The hackers know that, the foreign states know that, and they want in. Your data is extremely valuable to them. So really making sure, and I've seen a lot of my customers go in and they start in, and we've identified all our landscapes and our cyber risks, and I'm like, where is your applications? Where's your SAP? Like, what? So definitely want to challenge you on that. And when doing that, there's 4 key attack vectors, or 4 key pillars, if you would, I want you to think about. And the first one is what I'll call that vulnerability management, that configuration vulnerabilities, right? So SAP comes up with a whole bunch of parameters, a whole bunch of security concepts, a whole bunch of things where I can give somebody access, I can take it away, I can give somebody SAP all. Just for the record, if you give somebody SAP all, that's not a bug to SAP. They don't have a patch for that. It's really a configuration that you did or you didn't do. So really, it's key factors of that, kind of looking at how do I set up and how do I configure my system for the best optimal security with it working. The next one is patch management. Probably you guys are all aware of Patch Tuesday. SAP comes out with one every month. And it's really looking at fundamentally fixing the security patches, fixing the security bugs that SAP found. And you've got to stay on top of those. And there's processes for theirs. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And again, this is part of that identify the risks, right? The third one is your custom code. Everybody's built that Z or that Z or that Y, or your custom namespaces if you're a vendor. And the idea being is SAP won't patch that, but it could very well have security vulnerabilities, backdoors, directory traverses, SQL injections, just to name a few. And the scenario there is you want to have the ability to identify what the code is doing and where it could be a security risk and how to best remediate and correct that. And that last one, really that 0-day, the threat detection. And for there, you really start to think about, how am I monitoring? What am I looking at in my system today? Am I looking at people coming in, signing on with non-corporate terminals, coming in off hours, giving themselves elevated access, right? Are they downloading sensitive tables? That literally, what are they doing in the system right now? It's that monitoring of your systems, monitoring of your SAP. If you're using Splunk, if you're using Sentinel or any other SIM tool, you're doing that today through a security operations center, most likely. But I'm going to challenge you, you need to also do that for SAP. That's the key here. And really looking at that from identification, you need to know where your systems are, what's up, what's down, what you're monitoring at any given time. You see that little map on the left, kind of looking at, I want to see my entire landscape. And that's not just monitoring my production. You also got to monitor your development, monitor your quality assurance, monitor your testing, monitor your training system. Because any foreign actor, any state-sponsored, any hacker, they're going to use the path of least resistance, and they're going to come in and identify those points where I can get in the easiest. And it might be a development system with an RFC connection to my production system. Barry, if you would. And it comes to that first one, protect. So now that we know, we've identified what we're doing and what we have to protect, you've got to really look at protecting and those elements, those pillars I just talked about. And the first one is really looking at that vulnerabilities in your custom code. Really, do I have that source code injection? Do I have the key critical word? Backdoor identification on users. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this, and it's really more one of those things where you're looking at it and you're just saying, hey, one of my developers wanted to have an emergency backdoor if you got woken up in the middle of the night and had to get into the system. So we kind of did it that way. Said, that's great, and we're sure there was no bad intent meant, but hey, look, your security, if somebody else found that out, away we go. Barry? The next one is you really got to look at your security configuration, and including your security parameters, the password lengths and SSO and all that other good stuff. But you really got to come up with, who has those elevated rights? Who has the ability to delete a client, if you would? Who has the ability to create a client? It's usually an easy way to get into another client, if you would. Basically, those kind of scenarios, and you really need to walk through. And if you're going to protect it, you need to identify it, as we talked about earlier, and then protecting it, coming up with that roadmap, coming up with that structure to go after those tasks and those items and saying, hey, you know what, we can be better here, right? And again, it's just not your production systems, because the hacker, the bad actor, is going to come in from dev, from QA. So you really want to look at that holistically. Now, you know, Bill Oliver, you'll give him some access in production and maybe, you know, more access in dev, but you've got to look at that and evaluate that, especially the parameters as well, because they're not always consistent, right? You want to look at that. Barry, if you would. And of course, again, as we talked about earlier, notes. SAP, again, comes out every, that Tuesday of the month, second Tuesday of the month with security patches. You can't wait until the end of the year. You can't wait until quarterly patching. SAP comes out with those hot newses and those very highs. And really what you need to do, and you need to do it very effectively, is go and look at which ones do I need to put in, which ones do I need to put in now, which ones can I wait on, which ones did the source code get touched first, which source code do I use, those kind of scenarios. And if you're not really actively doing that, and really the key is active. A lot of people are like, I checked it, I went to SAP Me, I signed on, I downloaded them, great, we're starting the process. But there's a series of them that has to come in. And I think SAP threw a couple out, this last one that were 9.8, 9.9 on the CVSS scale, which are very high and definitely need to be evaluated. And again, that comes to the protect. If you're not patching, if you're not having a process to patch as soon as possible, you're really not protecting your system. Barry, if you would. And 0 day. And what I'm going to challenge you here, and challenge all my listeners here, is to really talk about working with your security partners, working with your security vendors to say, hey, are we staying up? Are we looking at, do we have, the capabilities to do some research? Are we finding things? And if we're finding things and we're saying, hey, we noticed a new thing here, and you'll see this timeline on one of the ones that we found from our security group, our research group. And really it comes into and kind of says, hey, how can I monitor? Because obviously, we'll do the disclosures to SAP, your security vendors, and the partners you're working with. They'll do those disclosures. They'll work with SAP, but they also have to protect you. And that's really, how do we get to that 0 day, that monitoring capabilities, right? Saying, hey, look, the system, we're waiting on SAP to patch it. It's all good, but we're also kind of helping you determine if somebody does that HTTP call that was with Log4j that really wasn't an SAP thing, but everybody claims to be an SAPC. How did we get through that? How do we monitor that? And that's really key concept. If you would, Barry. And again, all of this holistically, as I said earlier, kind of leads to hardening your SAP security position, right? It's never going to be perfect. As fast as you harden it, there'll be some person the other side of the world trying to figure out a way to break it. But really working through it. And that's really where the scenario looks at from that first one that NIST really wants to get into, is you've got to protect, right? So that's really that first concept. And that's kind of where they're going with that after you identify. For the detect side, we really need to start monitoring. So really what's happening right now? Is somebody trying to break in? Is somebody doing something malicious? Is somebody doing things of, ill-gotten intent, or maybe just accidentally doing it? So you got to look at things, and you got to be monitoring this instantaneously, within a minute, within a couple of minutes. Like, a couple of examples is somebody creating an RFC in production that nobody knew it was coming in. Critical log on outside of hours. Like, somebody's got Bill's ID and he's logging in at 2 in the morning as opposed to 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm based in New England, so I'm off the East Coast time zone. And also, is Bill also logging in from a non-workstation, right? So Bill Oliver logs in at 2 o'clock in the morning on a non-corporate workstation, and he's downloading sensitive data, all of the above. You need to track that and monitor that. Now, a lot of my customers started that, and you'll see the bottom screen there, you'll see Splunk. And, a lot of people, they have that security operations center, they're starting that security operations center. But the key is to you need to incorporate SAP. You need to incorporate that asset, because that asset alone to your organization is extremely valuable, as you all know, right? You're probably running the majority of your business on SAP in some form or fashion, right? So really understanding how that's working and how that's looking is fantastic, right? So really it's that detect and see what things going on, and then kind of having that dashboard on what are my very highs, medium, low. But what I'm going to also challenge you to is that last part of the circle is the respond. And this is where you have an action plan. And I've been through desktop tests where you pull out the laptops that nobody's ever used because they can't touch the network, and you've got all the USB drives that are still in the box, you know, all the wrappings and stuff like that. And what you see is, you know, you start to respond, hey, we have this, what's this, and you look up, you open up the playbook and you start playing through the scenarios. But what I'm going to also challenge you to do is create those action rules, and you can do that with SecurityBridge, where you're saying, hey, Bill Oliver came in the middle of the night on a non-corporate workstation and started downloading sensitive data. You know what I'm going to do? Halfway down my list, I'm going to kill all user sessions immediately. You know what, Bill, you're done. I'm dropping you off. You didn't come in under a firefighter ID. We'll make that assumption as well. And what we're going to do there is kind of look at that and say, hey, here's a direct response based on action. So you do X, I'm going to do Y, so on and so forth. And it's really kind of challenging and kind of having those capabilities and those opportunities to say, can I take an automated action? And, you know, maybe it was all good. Maybe Bill was at his mother-in-law's and it was an emergency and all that stuff. But to be able to stop that and show that is really a great action. And that's just kind of some of the things you should be looking at and some of the things doing again. And that kind of correlates to the respond part of the NIST framework. Barry, if you would, a little recap here. So when it's all said and done, and you know, that really wasn't Bill Oliver, that was somebody in some part of the world that, you know, was tied in, and they were really looking to do some bad things. And you stopped it. You know, that was a great action item. You turned him off. It was good, but you still had an exposure. You still had a breach. So now we've got to be able to recover. And, you know, obviously you've got to get your playbook out. You got to make sure you have your data backed up. You got to make sure you can rewire all your good stuff there with your networks and your routers and all that great stuff. But you really also need to know what assets, and you want to make sure you're monitoring those assets, and you want to make sure you have an inventory of those set assets. And again, looking at across the board, SAP is more than just, you know, an ABAP system. It's more than just an S4 system. It's really holistic, and you really want to make sure you're monitoring that and being able to recover those, because there'll be parts of the network. In this case, maybe it was an S4 system Bill came onto, or an ECC system. But, you know, maybe, hey, was our BO exposed? You know, hey, was success factors possibly exposed to an RFC? Those kind of things there. So you really want to track those. And that's really that kind of recovery, being to have a protocol and a procedure. And again, a lot of my customers have all this, but they really haven't incorporated SAP to the level, because they kind of felt in some degrees it was a black box.
Bill, just to interject one thought here is, I noticed that we're back around to identify, and it shows the tie between recover and identify, because how can you recover if you never identified it in the first place? So it's important to know your asset inventory at the beginning.
Absolutely. See, me and Barry, we work this all the time. Absolutely. Thanks for the plug, Barry. Fantastic, fantastic. And with that, if you would, Barry, the next slide. And there we have it. I want to thank you guys all. Appreciate it. If there's any questions, comments, thoughts, we're all open. We urge you now, you reach out to myself, reach out to Barry. So definitely, for sure, we can do that. From that perspective, Barry, any other thoughts or comments before we wrap this up?
So yeah, maybe let's go back and just touch on SEC. There is a requirement that they're introducing, which is if there's a breach, that this needs to be reported, and that's sort of why we brought SEC in. Did you want to talk about that just for a quick 30?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. So we've kind of showed you that framework, and we kind of showed you, how to go through that NIST framework, and CISA's kind of worked on. But Security Exchange Commission, as Barry mentioned, they're now requiring a scenario where if you are breached, you need to report that on your 10K. My wife, being a financial person, she knows all about those. But for those who don't, it is a scenario where it's your public record and your public investments and what you've said throughout the course of the year, and it reports to the Security Exchange Commission and onward and upward for investors. So again, the scenario there being is the scenario there is you're looking at it and they're saying, okay, there's more and more scrutiny on this. There's more and more culpability on this from a legal standpoint. And from that scenario, you're looking at it and you're saying to yourself, okay, now I've got to report it, so on and so forth. And as you know, class action lawsuits, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't claim to be one, nor have I ever played one on TV, but the scenario there is you're going to get wrapped up with it. And I think if you were looking at this scenario 5-6 years ago, people were almost afraid to tell you they got broken into. I think now companies are more and more open to it and they're accepting it because it's happening to everybody. It's not you. But are you doing a scenario where the situation is by a case where are you acting in good faith to your investors? And that's kind of where it is.
Yeah, I think having an automated system shows that good faith. So it can do two things. It can reduce the odds of you getting breached, but also if you are breached, it can help mitigate that breach. So you have the fastest response possible. You mitigate the damage. You can mitigate spread to other systems if you're monitoring it with an automated system. And that's across all systems, not just SAP. Hey, Bill, there's a question coming in.
Looking at it right now, I got it.
Okay.
So there's one
Yeah.
question on the instantaneous or in a few minutes, how quick can SecurityBridge identify the relevant data? That's really up to you, because what we do is we poll all the agents, all the systems. Our default is every 3 minutes it comes into that dashboard, but it can go every 2 minutes, every 1 minute, every 30 seconds, however you configure it. And then at that point, based on, we have a series of listeners, like, login from non-corporate workstation is a listener, creating an RFC is a listener. Give the audience an example from that perspective. And what that is you can move those into and control them into the scenario that says I can immediately port them over to Splunk, to QRadar, to Sentinel. Any one of them. We do have connections to a few. The most of them that we use, we can drop something called a CEF file, which is a common event format file. And what that does is that can immediately be piped in to any and all SIMs. I work with, in any given day, I've probably got 7 or 8 up and running on some of my customers. So, and again, that comes immediately from that perspective.
If we say it as it's not instantaneous real time, but it's near real time, is that a fair way to say it?
Oh, absolutely. Within 2 or 3 minutes, absolutely.
Yeah. And then just to round off, I know we're coming close on time. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, if I remember correctly from my own presentation. And this is a US body, but we're also hearing a buzz phrase called NIST 2, NIS2. So we just want to distinguish this as a separate acronym from NIST. Did you want to cover that? Or if not, I know we're close on time, maybe something that we cover separately, but if not, we can definitely include it in the white paper.
It's just the common level of cybersecurity. It's the NIST 2 directive is the common level cybersecurity in the EU for my colleagues across European Union. That's kind of where that sits. It's a very comparable body. NIST does a little bit more, but if you look at the NIST security framework, CISA, CISA is probably more applicable to NIS2 from the directive from the cybersecurity in the EU would probably be the best way to describe that. Okay, I believe
Okay.
we.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everyone. Go ahead, Bill.
Nope, thank you. Close it out.
All right. Thanks again, Bill.